So we've got a bumper panel for you now, and I think actually it will follow many of the themes that we've just been hearing about in the last panel. We've got quite a bit to pack into this. We're going to hear about community relations as we take temperature across Britain. We're going to hear, hopefully, about social cohesion and also what the media's role in all of that is. But before we get into that, I'm going to ask my wonderful panel just to sort of sit tight, because we're going to spend a few minutes interviewing directly Lord Russell Rook. Thank you for coming. And you'll also have the chance to ask questions as well as all of you too. So Lord Russell Rook, the Reverend and Right Honourable Russell Rook, OBE, is an Anglican priest and life peer. He was introduced to the House of Lords in January 2025 as Baron Rook of Wimbledon. Is that correct?
I think so,
Good.
if you say so.
Well, his journey in faith started with the Salvation Army, leading ultimately to his ordination in the Church of England. And beyond his duties as an Anglican priest, Lord Rook co-founded the Good Faith Partnership, collaborating with governments, NGOs, and faith communities on pressing issues like migration, social justice, and religious freedom. His political career started with roles such as parliamentary aide to Baroness Sherlock, an advisor on faith and civil society to the former Labour leader Ed Miliband. And now you are an advisor to Faith Minister Lord Khan of Burnley. You stand, I guess, really at this kind of the confluence, if you can put it that way, of faith and policy during, as we've just been hearing, a really pivotal era for UK faith communities. So what, in simple terms, is your role? What is a faith advisor to the faith minister? Enlighten us.
Thank you, Leo. That's a great introduction. I'm slightly nervous now. I mean, the first thing to say is I think my role with Lord Khan is largely informal. I'm a fellow member of the House of Lords, and we spend a lot of time working together on faith things, but I don't formally advise his department. What we do is we look after a programme called the Faith in Labour programme and the Parliamentary Faith Champions programme. And so a lot of my time is spent either helping the Parliamentary Labour Party to engage more effectively with faith communities, or to work with around 35 members of Parliament who are people either who are members of Parliament, members of the House of Commons, members of the House of Lords, who are people of faith or work in very deep and effective ways with different faith communities, to say, how do we make sure that this government is really reaching broad and deep into different faith communities? Because actually, if we're serious about national renewal, there's no way of doing that without faith. And then I work with Lord Khan, with Wajid Khan, who is the faith minister, on anything that he kind of picks up the phone and says, Russ, can you help me think about the future of this? Or can you organise that? Or can we go and visit this group? And so a range of different things come into my role. And in truth, because I only started in January, I'm still kind of working out what it is.
Okay, so when he picks up the phone and he says, what's the future of this? Give me an example.
Well, interestingly, at the moment, one of the things we're thinking about a lot is social cohesion. So there are huge concerns over a kind of increasingly polarised and divided society, something we might come on to, a society where religious identity seems to be playing a bigger role in our local politics and in people's kind of civic behaviour and how they interact in communities and how they engage in national issues. And it is absolutely right that we do the right thing with things like Islamophobia and anti-Semitism to combat kind of the bad behaviours. But there's a really big question. Government's not just about stopping bad stuff happening. Government's about making good stuff happen. And actually, if we want to have a conversation about fostering social cohesion, if we want to have a conversation about the communities we want to live in and the kind of country we want to be part of, that's a much bigger conversation. And so I find myself working with Lord Khan and his department, with Number 10, with different colleagues in Parliament, a lot on those kind of issues. So how is it that we actually foster a conversation in our country right now about the kind of country we all want to be part of and live in?
The panel before us has just talked about the rise in anti-Semitism and how, in some ways, they feel quite threatened. And you've just referenced the rise in Islamophobia as well. Talking about it, advising on it is one thing, but what are the practical considerations? What policy do we expect to come out of your advice and Lord Khan's actions?
there's a number of things. Obviously, in MHCLG, which is the department that Lord Khan works in, we have all kinds of things going on, and we have particular strategies on Islamophobia. So there's a new group looking at the definition of Islamophobia and what the government needs to do to protect Muslim communities from all kinds of threats and racism and abuse. And likewise, a piece of work that has been going on for a longer period of time around anti-Semitism with the last government and now with this government. So it's absolutely right that MHCLG, the government department tasked with protecting our faith communities, come up with strategies to deal with abusive behavior, to make it possible that actually when things happen, you mentioned the rise in threats and attacks and assaults, that those things either don't happen or that when they do happen, the right action is taken. And so MHCLG are working on those things. But there is something bigger, isn't there? Because the reality is government's power in that sense is limited. The power of faith, by its nature, is unlimited. So I think there's work for the government to do to engage faith communities to say, actually, if we want to put this stuff right, if we want something different to happen on the ground, then we have power in our faith communities to unlock positive behaviors that possibly government doesn't have in the creation of legislation. And so I think there is a huge amount we need to be doing over the next few years to unlocking the power of faith in local communities, precisely to have these conversations locally and decide what do we do to foster something more positive, not just to stop bad things from happening.
Well, I mean, given that community relations can seem very, very difficult at the moment for a whole host of reasons, some of which we've just heard about, I know that a lot of people, perhaps in this room, and I think Warren will come on to you in a second, in terms of Interfaith Week and the Interfaith Network, which no longer exists. Why aren't we resurrecting those kind of initiatives? Because surely that dialogue is really important to ensure that those community relations exist.
So I think, as I understand at the moment, MHCLG have just finished a period of consultation, and the Faith and Belief Forum have released a report which is called Bursting the Bubble, which looks at the whole idea of Interfaith Week and some of the broader issues facing the interfaith sector and the work that goes on in and around the country on building stronger relationships between faith communities. And that is really positive, and we will see what happens and what the government decides to do with the future of the week, but also with the future of government's funding for different interfaith activities. So that is kind of, we have to sort of wait and see. I don't know what's going to be coming at the end of that. What I think we can say is that we need a whole lot more. So the interfaith movement has brought a huge amount to our United Kingdom. It has made our kingdom more united. It has helped people from different communities to engage more effectively and more deeply one with another. But I think, as we've all seen from the last couple of years, the challenge that we face now, partly post-October the 7th, partly in this age of kind of populism and authoritarianism in a social media universe, is much bigger than anything that we've created infrastructure or strategies to support in the past. And so I think we're at an interesting moment where actually what we need is something bigger and something better, certainly something far stronger that can bear the challenge that we face in a world where it seems actually there's a huge investment in dividing people rather than uniting them. And I think faith has a unique role to play in actually counteracting some of that behavior.
Okay, I mean, you say that there's been a consultation. Do you personally believe that there should be either a son of or a daughter of the Interfaith Network?
I believe there should be many, like any good family, there should be many sons and daughters and granddaughters and grandsons. Given the size of the challenge we face, the idea that one organization could actually support all that this country needs to have effective relationships between faith communities and ethnic communities is crazy. We need, and in this room, I can see lots of people who run organizations and who work in organizations that are doing this work. And we don't need just one organization, we need an ecosystem that can support this kind of activity very broadly. So I think, yes, but we don't need just one son or daughter, we need many, many.
All right, thank you for the moment. I'll come to the audience shortly for some questions, but let me introduce the panel that have been waiting very patiently, because we're going to talk more about social cohesion and hopefully better community relations and also the role that the media can play in all of that. Let me introduce Gary, who is Gary Newby, who is an editor from ITV News. We've also got Manjit Kaur, who is the co-chair of the Coventry and Warwickshire Sacre. Rabbi Warren Elf, MBE, an esteemed rabbi, also co-chair of the Faith Network for Manchester. That's still correct, isn't it, Warren? Yeah. And somebody who's been very involved, as I've already said, in things like Interfaith Week, so I'm sure he's got something to say about that. Professor Adila Shafi, MBE from the University of Gloucestershire. Thank you for coming along today. She's a former parliamentary candidate and chair of the Avon and Somerset Police Scrutiny Panel and founder of the British Muslim Strategic Leadership Group and Commissioner for Race Equality in Bristol. That's all correct, I hope, as well, isn't it? We've introduced Lord Rook already, and we have Yaqub Qureshi, who is a democracy editor at Reach PLC. Reach, you probably know, is one of the UK's biggest newspaper groups, publishing at least 240 regional titles. Is it, Yaqub? Or hopefully some may have gone by the wayside, but also a few national newspapers as well, aren't there, as well? Now, so you've been waiting patiently. You all represent either the media or your communities. What's your reaction to the kind of things that Lord Russell Rook has been saying? Who has a question to follow on from what we've just been talking about?
Good afternoon, colleagues. I don't have a question, but I can probably illustrate a lot of Lord Rook's points, which is actually nice to see. First of all, we have 3 amazing MPs in the City of Coventry, and they're all women. And that's an interesting point. They work well together. They are members of the Labour Party, and they actually, when they first came to Coventry, particularly Taiwo and Zara, did actually spend a lot of time with every single faith group community, not just faith group community, but community groups generally and the more secular community. So, you know, that's great that it came from the top and it's actually happened at grassroots levels. I chair Coventry and Warwickshire Sacre, and I'm very proud of both of them. We sit under the Coventry Diocese, which meant when we were writing our agreed syllabus, we were able to use our cathedral as our starting point in terms of peace and reconciliation. This has meant we've got shared values, and particularly the shared values in relation to service and ensuring that all our citizens, regardless of their race, religion, economic well-being, etc., are served by all of us appropriately. And that's a really good starting point, because you'll know Coventry is a Labour authority and Warwickshire, up until the last election, was a Conservative authority. But I'd have to say, I'm very proud of them, because I think I experience what happens when good people come together. They came up with a motto that suited the whole of Coventry and Warwickshire, which is, we will do what benefits our children. So the conversation isn't about politics or political leads or whatever, it's what our children need. So when we wrote the agreed syllabus, Lord Rook, that's where we started from. Now, we wanted to consult our children, and at that time we met Religion Media Centre, because we've got lots of money, so we look for partners that can help us out in that area. And we brought children from key stages 3, 4 and 5 together and actually asked them what they felt our agreed syllabus should have. And that in itself was interesting, but the 2 points they left us with, they thought politicians ought to be taught how to speak about matters of faith using appropriate language. The second thing they were really quite interested in is the role that the media play or do not play in what they felt was their role as mirrors and megaphones. And that was quite an interesting phrase that they used. Now, since then, we've taken it further, and I'll just take you down the children route, because we divided it into different strands. During Interfaith Week, we fortunately did get some funding from the government, so thank you very much. And we had a conference for our young people in the morning, and then a conference for the adults in the afternoon. And Lord Khan came to talk to us. We're really impressed with how he spoke about Coventry, because usually people say they're sent to Coventry and the comments are not nice, but he's lovely. The long and the short of it is that 2 of our young people reported back to him. He was so impressed with them, he asked us to bring them to the Houses of Parliament. We took all 50 on the 29th of April, and he was scrutinised and quizzed and questioned for about an hour and a half. That's a lot of time for a minister to give young children, so sort of good on him. I left feeling with a very positive image of him and the government, and generally the feeling that the government felt RE, as Fiona was saying a few minutes ago, is an important subject. It was difficult to tell how the youngsters felt, because they had quite serious faces. Their body language was difficult to read, but you would have loved it sitting on the bus listening to what they had to say. One, they felt they'd been given access to the government at a very high level, which they'd not expected. Secondly, they felt they were able to ask their questions. They didn't necessarily want a definitive answer. They wanted somebody who would listen. Now, Warwick University, bless them, are going to take it one step further, and we're going to invite all our 15, 16 and 17-year-olds to Warwick University. Lord Khan has agreed to attend and talk to them for our next interfaith. I could go on, there's plenty of examples, but I just thought that actually sort of reflected what you've just said, Lord Rook. So please thank Lord Khan and the government and anybody else who's doing it positively. But do remember, our starting point should be what our children need, because they're our legacy, they're our future. We deserve to give them the best we possibly can. And remember that the world isn't Fred blogs down the road, it's Fred blogs across the, the other side of the world. And if we're going to prepare our children for a global village, then we've got to do our bit as well. And that means being open-minded, critical thinkers, and being able to listen, disagree without the conflab. And I can't
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. I don't know whether you had a response to that or...
No, it's fantastic. Just thank you for your work. It's amazing. That's really, really good. Very encouraging.
So, Warren, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'll try and be brief, unlike I normally am. Sorry, I can normally talk for but you mentioned, Lord Rook, that the governments want to take a deep dive into into the faith communities, get to know them, understand. And we're talking about social cohesion. Isn't it also important to actually be looking across communities and how different communities relate to each other as well, which is a very important aspect, to my mind, for interfaith work and multi-faith work, just how we relate to each other, how we respond to each other. Do we recognize the concerns each other have, and how can we get to know those? And in some ways, that, I think, is an element of the way to tackle hatred and those issues, which clearly the government are putting their minds to. I think at this conference we also want to make sure that we encourage the media to try and pick up on the positive examples that there are. But also it's about how we as interfaith groups and faith communities relate to each other and how we can take that on board. Which I suppose brings me on to the next point, which mentioned Interfaith Week and the closure of the Interfaith Network. And I think quite rightly you said that it's important that there are, I like the analogy, that many sons and daughters and grandchildren, etc. And there are some very good faith and interfaith groups around already. And I know in Greater Manchester we've been working on the faith covenant, interfaith covenant, first of all across Greater Manchester Combined Authority and now with each of the 10 boroughs. And that was set up by Faith Action in conjunction with the government. And there's lots of other groups around. We also, I think, need to make sure we identify the holes that are going to be left because the interfaith network isn't there. And sometimes I'm very aware that we need to renew. And one of the things I mentioned to Greater Manchester Combined Authority when we initiated the covenant, faith covenant, was that we're not asking for funding directly for the interfaith work. If there is, then terrific. And I'm aware last time MHLG funded various things, they missed out a lot of interfaith groups and gave to some of the little sports clubs and football clubs and things, where there doesn't seem to have been any ongoing and long-lasting work. And I think what I would ask, whether it is locally or national governments, is that if there isn't money to give to interfaith work from the current budgets and the future budgets initially, can we encourage local businesses, and in particular, as I was talking about before, local, some of the bigger football clubs. I actually have been saying for many years that Manchester United and Manchester City should be supporting Manchester interfaith work and the social cohesion work. As a Spurs supporter, that's why I didn't say it earlier, and I didn't admit to it. There are lots of big clubs that should be, could be, must be supporting that work, setting the example for local business, for all sorts of local initiatives. We need to be thinking outside the box and taking this on. And realistically, we need government and local government support to do that.
Can I just ask a question before I come to you, Professor Adila? That there won't be everybody in this room that has some experience with the Interfaith Network, but was it something as a show of hands that you were pretty disappointed about, if you were disappointed about that, the lack of it being apparent in the work that is done in terms of multi-faith? Was that something that people in this audience felt very upset about? Okay. Thank you. I'm going to come to you for questions shortly. Professor.
Thank you. My question is genuinely quite a short one.
Okay.
You talked a lot about your plans, and they look really interesting. I just wondered, I'm from the city of Bristol. What does that look like for me and my communities in real life?
Well, can I just try and do those last two together?
Yes,
Is that right, Liam?
absolutely.
So I mean, firstly, on the first point, I'm disinclined as a Manchester United fan, given recent results, to answer the question of a Spurs supporter. Having said that, I agree. As an Old Trafford season ticket holder, they should be using some of my money to support interfaith work in the local community. But I think there is something that's really important there, which is, again, some of the work around interfaith we've got very good at doing that in our places of worship and our faith-based organisations and charities. And part of the next stage, I think, for the government and for community more generally, is to recognise faith stuff doesn't just happen in places of worship and doesn't just happen in faith-based charities. So I've been very involved in the Faith at Work movement, and the Faith at Work conference was a few months ago. Johnny Reynolds, as the business minister, met with 20 chief execs of FTSE 100 companies in the morning for breakfast to talk about faith in the workplace and how businesses and employers across the country could be far better at helping people to get to know each other and understand different faith backgrounds and work together. And in the day, Lord Khan addressed the wider conference. So I think there are some really interesting things going on, whether it's sport or business, where we're saying, actually, people of faith, I'm an Anglican priest, and I was at church all day yesterday, and there's this sense in that people of faith are only interested in one thing and going to church on Sunday. But funnily enough, the people that are in my church on Sunday, well, they're in work today, and their kids are in school, and they really care about this, and they really care about that, and they have a heart for international things, and they're worried about things in their local council and their borough. And so one of the reasons why government sometimes finds faith difficult is it's not discrete. It kind of blurs and bleeds into everything. And I think we've got to be a lot better at saying, actually, faith is everywhere in our society. How do we support people of faith to engage one another and help one another to understand each other's worlds, the worlds they live in, and how we can build a better world together? So I think that kind of idea of broadening is absolutely brilliant. Of course, we need to reinforce and support the existing initiatives, but we need faith to help us reach the parts that at the moment government and others are struggling to reach. I think in terms of the locality, none of this works unless it's local. I mean, faith is extraordinarily transcendental, of course, but it's also extraordinarily local. It happens in people, it happens in places, in communities, in places of worship, in charities, in different community groups. And so I think one of the things that the government has to do, and I will certainly be sharing this feedback with Lord Khan later, who I'm seeing this evening, is to saying the more you can localise this, the better. So in my experience, government centrally saying what needs to happen for interfaith is this is not usually the way to make things happen. The way to make it happen is to go to a place like Bristol, a city I know well, which has actually brilliant kind of local infrastructure around faith groups and local civil society, and to say, actually, well, what is working here? How can we help that to work more? How can we broaden it? How can we increase the impact? How can we resource it better? So I think one of the strategies that MHCLG will look at is not just an interfaith strategy for the country, but actually what can we do to identify where there's brilliant stuff happening, help that to happen more, and then help others to learn from it.
I look forward to seeing you in Bristol soon. Then.
Oh, I'm in Bristol very regularly. We should talk.
Okay. I want to just bring us on now to how the temperature is feeling within our communities. And I'll bring in our two journalists as well. After the riots in 2024, one of the things that the Religion Media Centre did was to have some briefings online, live briefings with members of the communities that we serve, to ask them how they were feeling after we'd seen violence, a breakdown of community relations, a lot of the things we've been talking about. We brought people together. They themselves were born out of our connecting communities or creating connections, meetings that we'd had across the UK. You may have been to some of those meetings that we had in places like Bristol and in Manchester and in Plymouth. So the question now really is, what is the temperature check? Given what we heard in the panel just before ours as well, I just want to ask our representatives, but also our media representatives, whose job, I think, Manjit, did you say, is to mirror what's happening in society, to tell the stories that need to be told. Jakob, let me come to you first of all. You were at some of our Creating Connections events. Has it helped you to connect more with people on the ground? Are your journalists telling the stories about real people that need to be told?
The short answer is no. I'm managing a group of journalists that are telling the real stories. Yeah, it's been really helpful, those sessions, and I think this wider discussion has been really helpful. It's elicited a number of nuances, and it's been a cause of reflection for me as well. I'm going to talk about trust, because I think that's really fundamental to community cohesion. It's fundamental to how we behave. We trust things every day. We trust what we see on our phones some of the times. We spend a lot of time on our phones. We spend a lot of time consuming things, consuming information, consuming views, consuming videos. We don't necessarily always think about it that much. We maybe interact with it at a fairly surface level. But trust is absolutely essential to my business. My business is reporting on what's happened. I would not take issue. I'd slightly disagree. I don't think my job is, or the job of the media is necessarily just to hold a mirror up to what's happening in the world. I think it's also to ask questions about it and to ask questions of our readers as well. Do we do a good job of that sometimes? Could we do better? Yes. Are there complex and fundamental things which have impacted our industry? Yeah, absolutely yes. I won't spend a lot of time diving deep into this, but the business model for journalism in the UK, around the world, has fundamentally shifted in my professional career. I absolutely wish we lived in a time where people would pay £1, £2 every day for a newspaper. They don't anymore. They do in some specific cases. For the local media, regional media, which is fundamentally where my career sits, it is a very complicated business model. It's a very complicated business. We're not relying on the same, we can't rely on the same income streams that we did before. The consequences of that are we don't necessarily have the same bandwidth, same specialist reporters that might be able to drill into some of the issues, build the contacts, offer some of the nuances that other, national media can, specialist media can. But there are some really good examples of that happening. I mean, we've referenced the Southport incident. In fact, actually reach titles and non-reach titles, local media titles all across the UK were dealing with a barrage of Facebook and Twitter fakes. Why aren't you reporting that it's all kicking off in Oldham? It wasn't. Our reporter took about 20 minutes to debunk that was happening, phoning up Great Manchester Police's duty inspector and demonstrably proving that wasn't the case, writing a story to say that it wasn't the case. People should ignore what they're reading all over Facebook. So we're fighting a battle on a number of different fronts. I think I'd be much richer, and frankly, I wouldn't be here. I'd be on the Bahamas somewhere if I had a solution to that. But we are trying. I think there is goodwill, and I'm happy to speak to anyone at the panel afterwards that's got questions about how the media works, why they don't do this, why press releases about projects, really good projects you're doing, haven't necessarily landed, haven't been picked up. But I'm keen just to engage with people, and I think the vast majority of journalists, particularly local news outlets, are, because they do recognise that their business is in those communities, and it involves engaging with people.
That's the importance of local democracy, isn't it, to have good local journalists. Let me bring Gary in as well. A reminder, he's an editor for ITV News, working in television. So what's your feeling of where we are right now?
Right, well, I'm actually the news editor at ITV Central, so that's the ITV Midlands news service. So when the anti-immigrant riots took place, for us that meant Staffordshire, and in particular Tamworth, where you might remember a local hotel came under attack, which obviously we covered as a news story. But what was interesting was the response from the communities afterwards, which we were able to drill into. And what helps us there, we have actually two inclusion and diversity panels. Every ITV region has them, and the national newsroom has them as well. They're made up of various faith groups, but also other organisations, groups representing people with disabilities, all sorts of cultural groups as well. And they sort of monitor our output. Each one meets 4 times a year, so that's 8 meetings we hold over a year with our panel. They feed back to us the stories that we've selected, or chosen to cover, and all sorts of things around it. you know, the contributors, the language we use, all sorts of things they feed back to us. But they're also a great resource for us as well in terms of stories and contributors. And they came into their own after the Tamworth riots and other public order incidents in finding us the other side of the argument, as it were, people who are trying to rebuild and support their communities, putting us in touch with people who came to this country as an immigrant or a refugee, were now contributing to the communities in which they were living. So we could really give another side to this argument that was taking place about immigrants in this country, in particular how they were being accommodated, etc., etc. Can I also just mention as well, though, because we've got Brooke here, and it's great that we can ask you some questions. The panel are also a great barometer, really, about cohesion. You know, they're, I say, various faith groups. They have all kinds of experiences, positive and negative ones. They are impatient with the government. You talked a lot about conversation. Yep, that's been going on for some time. I think what they really want to hear is the plan of action. You know, what is going to be introduced in terms of new laws or other initiatives, and when that's going to happen. Can you say anything about that today?
Well, I'm going to ask you to just hold it for a second, because we can. I just want to take a quick temperature check from our other panelists. Adila, what's it like in your community? I mean, given everything we've talked about today and in this panel, what is the temperature check for you right now, and how are the media helping or not?
Well, in terms of the feelings towards the media, not particularly positive at all. And it is a question actually to our media colleagues here. What do you do specifically about rebuilding trust, being a big thing, and trust and confidence that what's being reported is, I know you can't be as objective because it's individuals reporting. But what do you do to ensure that all sides of all stories are told in a way that positions the truth as much as possible? Of course, everyone, you have to mediate the truth, but that's the thing, is how are you building that trust? Because what we see in communities is a breakdown of trust with media, a breakdown of trust from government and what government has and hasn't done as well. And how do you rebuild some of those things, because they really just are sitting in a bit of shambles. It's not an easy job, of course. It is difficult and it will take time, but if we hide behind complexity and difficultness, it will never happen. So we've got to start somewhere. So it'd be really interesting to see what people's thoughts are on where do we start and what are we going to do specifically, because a lot of the words they sound really good, but sometimes I like to hear what's actually going to be happening right down at the nitty-gritty, really. So what would you do if you were going to start on Monday, for example? That's the sort of thing.
Adila, thank you. Warren, temperature check from you.
I think I'm reminded of the Creating Connections sessions that we had around the country. And I think the day we had in Manchester, I felt so positive about some of the links that were being established and some of the connections being made, which I think we've been really, as faith and interfaith groups, we've been really pathetic about keeping up and maintaining and following up, which is partly our fault, but partly our busyness, our lack of experience and lack of connections and how to do that. So we need more support in, I suppose, in doing that. I suppose if there were media links who had a responsibility to try and liaise with us, that would certainly help us. But maybe we have to be better at making sure that we establish links. We try and get some copy to you on a regular basis, because there's stuff every week that we can actually put out, either from particular faith communities or from some of the interfaith stuff. I mean, the number of things I'm doing this week, it's like, I also make sure that what I'm doing in Liverpool on Thursday afternoon goes out to the media. Some of the stuff I'm doing tomorrow goes out from Manchester, and not tomorrow, Wednesday. But yeah, there are things constantly, and we need to get better at it. But we do need support and reminders and being pushed.
Okay, thank you, Warren. Manjit.
Slightly different. I'm going to touch wood. Before I say anything, one, Coventry and Warwickshire have been fairly calm, which I'm really pleased about. I'd have to say our relationships with the political leads have improved considerably since we had the Religion, Media and Centre, but I think we've worked at it. I'd have to say, as I said, we've got very good MPs and we've got very good local councillors, and our education portfolio holders is actually part of SACRE. And we've used SACRE as a body to actually get around, because it's a statutory body. I'd say we too have a lot of work to do with media. Still don't know how to handle it. I still personally don't know what you find interesting in terms of what you want for your newspapers, except negative stories. I'm with my colleague who said earlier that 60% of the stories to do with faith groups are usually negative, and the 40% might make the odd paper about that size. And I would like to see more stories, not just about faith groups, but minorities, community groups, secular groups, as an integral part of mainstream media, not an add-on just because it's Vaisakhi, because it's Diwali, because it's Christmas, because it's Easter. For me, one of the best newspaper articles I saw in Coventry, and I'm 65 now, was seeing the Nagar Kirtan on the centre page of the Coventry Evening Telegraph as one of the great events of Coventry that year. And I'd never seen that before in my life. So I think we're still, media, I agree with you, both sides. Politics, as far as Coventry is concerned, both locally and MP level, has got better and better. So well done one side, but hard work on the other.
Okay, thank you for that. I just want Gary and also Jakob to respond to that, and then I'll come to you, Lord Brooke. We talked a lot at Creating Connections about festivals and covering festivals, which seem to be the fallback of journalists sometimes. It's Easter, it's Diwali, whatever. Do you hear that message about let's do more stories about ordinary people? Stories are about real people doing real things.
Yeah, 100%, Leo. And, you know, I think it is a bit of a chimera, the sort of, you know, the perpetual sort of SEO articles, but when is Eid, when is Vaisakhi? I think, yeah, we are guilty of that as an industry to an extent. I think we are moving away, and I think there are examples of good practice. Look, I'll be really honest with you. I'm not here to speak to, you know, to defend journalism or to talk about, you know, how brilliant we are doing. There are challenges there. What I can say is that the industry has changed quite significantly in the 25 years that I've been a journalist. There are some really good examples of best practice. One of our titles, Birmingham Mail, has produced the Brahmi Muslim newsletter. That's been real success story. It's been going for 2 years now. We've got reporters that are, I think, and editors that I think have taken a more nuanced step in their analysis of community relations, in making reporting on faith communities and in our diverse communities much more of a tokenistic thing. We've got a regular halal restaurant review that runs in the AMN every week, one of our best read What's On articles every single week. That's been through analysing our audience, trying to genuinely serve the audiences in the diverse cities that our titles serve. Could we do better? Absolutely yes. Absolutely yes. Could we do better recruitment to ensure that we've got people not just coming into the industry, but promoted within our industry who represent the diversity of the UK, both faith, religion, socioeconomic backgrounds? Yeah, absolutely. We've still got the vast majority of people coming into not just my company, but I think journalism generally that are white, middle class graduates. You know, and with the best one in the world, you know, you do just by creep end up with this kind of monoculture there. I think it's important that we have that diversity of perspectives, that those people are promoted as well, and that we have those informed conversations in our newsrooms when we're choosing content, when we're choosing the treatment of content. But I do think the goodwill is there, and Leo wants to jump in there, but what I would say is I have been involved in nuanced conversations about how we deal with our national coverage in our national titles, our regional coverage, all very sensitive events. Have we got perspective of those? Who can we reach out to? And you know, where our blind spots are, and we're trying our best.
Okay, just conscious of time. Gary, quick response from you. And also, can you put up your hand if you've got a question for Lord Rook? Okay.
Jakub's right. We can do more. We should do more. We should do better, and that's why the Creating Connections event run by the RMC is brilliant, because you can forge all sorts of contacts there. We've had people from those events that have now joined our I&D panels and as I say, feedback to us. I was going to say as well, in terms of covering religious events, we can sometimes be quite lazy about that. But I was really thrilled that last Friday when we covered Eid, we went to one of our big local mosques in Birmingham, and I thought, oh God, it's just going to be another sort of Friday prayers of explanation of Eid, and that's the box ticks. But actually, thanks to the contacts we've made there over the years, and they're getting to realise, you know, that we're looking for very much people-focused stories. They'd got 2 or 3 people, 3 or 4 actually, people who they described as newcomers to Islam. They were new to the faith. And I just find it quite moving and a little envious when I hear people talk about what their faith means to them and the support and comfort it gives them, and that sense of family as well. And it just changed that whole piece. It sort of transcended a religious festival, a religious event, to actually things that people of any faith or no faith, I think, would be really interested to
That's
hear.
a nice point. And also remember that there are people doing things outside of Eid, outside of Purim, outside of Easter, doing everyday things. We've got a question. We'll start over here then, and then just for a couple more minutes.
Thank you. That's a really good point to pick up from Gary. Lord Russell, I'd like to put it to you because I know you could be in a position to really think about this. So taking off my journalist hat, last Friday, as the lay chaplain for asylum seekers and refugees in my church, I spent 90 minutes in a London Borough housing office with a newly status refugee, young woman, 28 years old. She'd been evicted from her Home Office accommodation after 2 months. And after 90 minutes, we finally got to speak to somebody who said she's not vulnerable enough. She is a single woman, but she's quite healthy and her asthma wasn't an issue. I'm coming to the point. So her asthma could have been a reason for her to stay in the local area where she's built relationships, she's got involved in a place of worship, she's made friends, but now they're telling her, you probably have to move to a completely different part of the country. And she's already traumatized. Picking up on what Gary said, is there a way where someone's faith is seen as a reason to not uproot them yet again when they're a newly recognised refugee? Is that something?
And Lord Russell, I'm just going to ask you to keep that one in as well, so we can sum up at the end. Let's get another question in before we round it up. One more question, and then I can. So, Alex.
Hi there, I'm Alex Strangways Booth. I used to work for the BBC. For about 15 years, I did religious affairs for the BBC local radio stations. In 2023, they reduced 40 Sunday breakfast shows, specifically broadcasting about faith, to 14 shows. And I left. I still do religious affairs stories for an independent production company. So in the 30 years, I can't believe some of the conversations that we're having today. They're exactly the same conversations that I've been hearing for 30 years. You know, the lack of diversity among journalists, for example, the problems of representations of Muslims in the media. So since I became a journalist, things have got much worse. There are fewer outlets for faith stories. There's no interfaith network anymore. So I've seen several faith ministers come and go, and I really can't discern any impact that they had on society. So what difference can a faith minister actually make in a society where actually it's much harder to talk about faith than it ever has been before?
Okay, Alex, thank you. So, Lord Russell, Let me ask you to sum up. You've heard a lot of stuff coming out there, and it's probably quite an impossible job, but I'd like you just to finish off by summing up some of the answers that to the questions you've been asked.
Yeah, so I agree. In fact, I think you're right. It's got a lot worse. I was meeting with a very credible secular organisation which specialises in understanding voter behaviour and citizen behaviour last week. And one of the things they pointed out to me was the things that they see in local communities, the behaviours they see and the ideas that actually make an impact on local life are increasingly affected by a sense of religious identity. So whether that's your view of what's going on in Israel and Gaza, whether that's things that happened around COVID, whether that's the riots last year, whether that's the rise of the right, whether it's issues around immigration. Increasingly, we are seeing people acting out their religious belief and identity in all kinds of different policy areas and practical areas of local life. The challenge is our society, as Alex said, is far more secular than it was 10, 20 years ago. And often the people that have to deal with those behaviors and engage with those people aren't particularly religiously literate. They don't actually understand the religious ideologies which inform those behaviors and belief. And so we do have a genuine crisis, and the people in this room are incredibly important because you are amongst that few who understand that faith and belief drive people's behaviors and beliefs in the most powerful ways, whether it's on a local issue, a national or an international issue. And that means just everyone has to do better. I am not a government minister. I cannot tell you what the MHCLG will do on policies of faith. I can tell you, as a Labour peer who supports the government, that there are good work going on, there are good conversations, there are plans, there are things that hopefully will come into reality in the next weeks, months and years that will make a difference. But it will never be enough. You're absolutely right. No one faith minister can actually, and that's one of the challenges of being the faith minister for my friend Lord Khan, is that faith impacts every policy area in the UK, every government area in the UK. You cannot, as the faith minister, impact every policy area in the UK. You have a fairly small brief. So what we need is a government that takes faith seriously across every single department. So government has to do better. In the same way, I think media has to do better. I think media sometimes has a tendency to report on certain issues, and certainly to hear from certain players who can make more of an impact in the media marketplace. I, as a priest, sometimes sort of find myself shivering when I see a Christian organisation on TV, on radio, saying what Christians believe, thinking that that's not representative of my community. But what I do know is the way they see it actually gets people to switch on and actually gets clicks and actually gets attention, but they're not representative. So I think media has to do a better job. Media has to be more religiously literate of the different religious identities and ideologies that drive issues, whether they be international, national or local. I think we have to do a better issue around that. But actually also people of faith have to. I do not work for Adidas. But if I did work for Adidas and I found that someone was making trainers and sticking 3 stripes on them and claiming they were Adidas and they were completely counterfeit and selling them down the road, I would do something about it. I would pick up the phone to my lawyers. And there are things that go on in our country and our community every day which are counterfeit expressions of faith. The forms of Christianity that inspire the far right are counterfeit. Some of the things that are reported in the name of Islam are counterfeit. So there are all kinds of issues where our faiths are used to try and give credence to things which are not only incorrect, but they're downright dangerous. And we need to be better as people of faith of calling that out, but we also need to be better at showing a contrast and showing a different way to do life and community and social action and social cohesion. And so I think all of us need to do better. Government can definitely do a lot better. The media can do better, and people of faith can do better, because the challenge is bigger than we've faced for a long time. And if we don't step up and show leadership, there's no one else who will.
Okay. We're going to have to kind of curtail it there. Thank you for that, a very powerful way to finish. Thank you to our panel as well, and thank you to you for listening. Thank you.